Now you're listening to Fantastic Formosa with John Abrams in Taipei. Hey, welcome back to Fantastic Formosa for another episode with John Abrams. Once again, we have this great guest, Scott Sommers from Canada. He has a master's degree in sociology in Canada. What school did you go to again?
I went to Queen's University in Kingston.
Okay, all right. And before that, you got your bachelor's where?
Simon Fraser University in Vancouver.
Are they close to each other in location?
No, they're on they're across Canada from each other.
See, Americans don't know anything about Canada. We know it's north.
Yeah.
Americans are completely ignorant of every place besides America. In fact, I didn't even know that the U.S. had invaded Canada at one time and literally got lost and had to turn around and come back because we didn't know where we were.
Well, that expedition was led by Benedict Arnold.
Oh, well, that explains a lot. Wasn't he hung?
Yeah.
Yes. And didn't the British Army go down to Washington after that and burnt down the White House? Yeah. Yes, that's why it's white, because originally it was a different color, and instead of rebuilding some of it, they just painted the black charcoal embers white to cover up the. That's a fixer-upper in America. So that's why it's the White House, ironically, thanks to the British Army in Canada that came down and did that. But it is embarrassing that we went up there and got lost and had to turn around and go back. That's one of the worst U.S. military campaigns ever. But I'm sure that Canada, you guys make a lot of jokes about Americans. Anything of interest?
I haven't lived in Canada for a long time, and I don't know how Canadians talk about the U.S. To me, these days, there's a lot more contact between Canada and the U.S. than when I grew up there.
Right.
And it's more difficult to get across the border now, of course.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought there were just like roads that, in the woods that you could just drive across and, you didn't even know you were in Canada or U.S.
There are places like that. But, the major border crossings, when I was young, we could just walk across. I've walked across the border.
Okay.
Now you have to show a passport.
Really?
Yeah.
Just to go across to the U.S.
Yeah.
from Canada?
Yeah.
Because I had friends that went to school in New York, Syracuse, and they would just drive across the border to go drinking for that night, have a beer.
I've walked across that border crossing.
To
buy beer, and then when I was at grad school, because that's near Queen's University.
Right.
So we would go across the border to buy beer because it was cheaper.
Wasn't there like gasoline issues? People would buy cheaper gas across the border and just.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, a big problem.
But it's different now. It's more difficult to get across the border, and people get refused permission to enter now.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that seems a little rude. Canada is supposed to be really nice. People are Canadian nice, we used to call them. Is that still true, or?
I feel a difference between the officials at the border. The Canadian officials are more friendly. Than
the Americans on the other side.
Yeah.
Wanting to search everything in your car, maybe, or
looking for a reason not to let you in.
Okay. It's kind of the opposite, I think, in the border in the South, where everyone gets across. What a immigration crisis apparently in the U.S. I don't know exactly what's going on, but many of our listeners live in Southeast Asia and other places, and. They're interested in maybe going to school here and studying for a degree. And you have a PhD here, right?
I have a PhD from a Taiwan university, yes.
Wow. Okay. What school did you go to?
I went to National Taiwan Normal University.
Okay. Then that's called Shida, right?
Yeah,
that's what we call
Shida.
It locally.
Yeah.
And that's a second biggest school, right? I think.
Well, it's the leading school of education in Taiwan.
Right. Okay. And you got your PhD in what subject?
Educational psychology.
Okay. Wow. That's interesting. It sounds like brainwashing, psychology and education.
Well, some people say that about schools.
Well, yes, of course. I think that was it George Orwell, the legendary writer who wrote 1984, said that all art was propaganda. I think he's correct on that one. But if you don't know George Orwell, please read him. A 1984, great book. Animal Farm, great book. Anyway, you studied education. How long did it take you to get your PhD?
Well, it took me 7 years. That was a little bit longer than most students because I was working at the time.
7 years. And that is how many hours? 20 hours total to get a PhD and classwork, or?
Well, a PhD in Taiwan is a lot more work than you typically see in an American or Canadian school. We took more courses than you typically see in the West, and the qualifying examination system here is quite intensive. So it's not entirely comparable to a Western PhD. Because of that, the dissertation that we presented is it's organized a little bit differently than you get in an American school.
Well, PhDs in America, they have coursework.
Yeah.
And normally, what is that in America? Normally for coursework, that means you're in a classroom, right?
Yeah.
That's what, 20 hours maybe?
Yeah. Well, I had 30 hours of coursework.
Normally in America or Canada, isn't that correct? And here it's what?
Well, my program was 30 hours of coursework, so there's a lot of courses. And in educational psychology, we had to take courses in a broad range of covering the entire field. So even if I'm not doing research in a particular thing, they would make everybody take courses in something unrelated to what they're studying.
So this is sort of what we call multidiscipline studies, right? When they make you take other subjects that you wouldn't, multidisciplinary studies, maybe.
Or comprehensive. It's a comprehensive review of the everything related to the field.
Interesting. Why do they do that? Just to give you an option? Maybe you change your mind and think maybe this is an interesting area to go into, or?
I think it's historically how Taiwan feels about the education of a professor. A professor should not necessarily be specialized. That they should have a much broader understanding of their field. And it's a lot of extra work, and at the time you're not happy about it. But looking back on it, I'm glad that they made us do that.
In America, I thought about getting a PhD, but people were coming back to me saying, well, they make you teach. You have to teach freshman and sophomore, these what we call 101 classes.
Yeah.
And you spend most of your time doing homework, or not doing homework, grading homework for kids. I did a little bit of that for my master's degree, and I could see how tenured professors were taking advantage of graduate students in some ways. Did you do anything like that while you were here?
No. When I was a master's student, I had to do that. I had to grade papers for my professor, but we don't do that here. The Taiwanese graduate students don't do that here.
Wow, there's no what we call graduate assistantships, or that's what we called it in the U.S. Yeah. You had to work for your, you get paid actually a very little amount, but you do get some. You don't have to pay tuition sometimes on these programs if you do that.
Well, the tuition here is much lower than we're used to, and the result of that is students don't necessarily have to work. Some students might work outside the school, but there's no, like I was a teaching assistant when I did my master's degree.
TA.
I was a TA. There's nothing like that here.
I hated it. I really did. For my master's program, I had to grade papers and teach a 101 class, and I felt the pain that that the students would just go to sleep in class, and it was just like, oh my God, this is something that I understand now why I don't want to be a teacher or professor, and you can't do anything about it in America. But here, obviously, what happens if someone falls asleep in class?
I'd say it's not that students are necessarily paying more attention in class, but I think things are organized a little bit differently. The school I went to is a top school, and students are expected to do a lot of independent work. And there might be a class where you would just show up for the first class, and the teacher has a lot of work. In fact, in one class, she gave us all of the work and said she was going to leave, and we had to sort it out between us. And then we would come to the different classes and present the work that we had prepared for.
Oh my
So
God.
we basically did everything. Their job was to present us with the material that they felt we should master,
Okay.
and we had to organize it ourselves.
Mm.
And that class was a little bit more open, a little bit more liberal than a lot of other classes. But that was sort of more the direction of my education here.
Your PhD program, did they have something called lab? We had to do lab work, and that means, I guess you take a student and you practice your technique, or understand lab work, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it exactly to my listeners, but some of these programs require you to actually practice what you learn.
In my program, we didn't have anything like that. There's another program in my department, counseling psychology, and the students in that program had to do practicums in counseling centers or schools or prisons where they would be counselors. In my part of the program, we didn't have to do that.
I think that's helpful, though. If you if you're going to study this and they send you to a prison to, in America, to not be in prison, but to learn from how to educate people in these environments, difficult environments, like a prison or a school system that has a high failure rate, for example, impoverished students in poor neighborhoods, maybe. That would be an interesting way. That would be called lab work, I suppose, right? Do you have to have a teaching certificate like in the U.S. to teach high school? You do here, right? To teach high school, but not college.
No, for public schools, you have to be you have to be certified by the Ministry of Education. But for private schools, private high schools, they would have a different system of recruiting teachers. It would be the same in the U.S. Private high schools would have another equivalent standard. Post-secondary teachers have a different system of licensing here.
Post-secondary is what exactly for my listeners?
Well, universities and colleges.
Right. Okay.
But we're licensed by the Ministry of Education to be professors.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
So did you have to take a special test just to get that for a professorship?
Well, we're examined. We have to present documents to the ministry, and they determine if we're qualified. And I've been issued a license. I have a actual certificate from the Ministry of Education that gives me permission to be employed as a professor.
Interesting. In the U.S., it's completely different. Yes, you do have to have an state education certificate to teach in public or schools like high school or elementary school. But in universities, no, you normally have to have a PhD. And what's happening in the U.S. is there's a big fight over tenure. Now, tenure. Do you have tenure here?
There's permanent full-time employment, so that would be the equivalent of tenure. I have tenure.
Great.
There are other professors who aren't tenured.
Now, they don't. Their risk is they could get fired or laid off or something, right?
I guess so. I don't know that that's ever happened, but I guess legally it could.
In America, tenure sort of like gives you a certain. It protects you from being fired, I think, at least at some level, unless you really go over the ledge. There's a big fight or debate, I suppose, in the U.S. over tenure, whether they should just get rid of it and motivate their teachers, because after a while, I noticed, at least when I was in university, that tenured professors seemed to be talking about everything but the subject that they were teaching. I would get lectured about every subject beyond psychology, for example, their family problems, their cars broken down, for an hour. I would where are we in the book? I'd stare at them like, I just spent $300 for this class, and I'm not getting anything out of it. And there's nothing we could really do about it. But here, no, you have to teach. You have to go into the room and provide materials and challenge your students, right?
Well, I personally have had a very good experience here with schools. I haven't had any of the problems that you're talking about.
Did you have them in Canada when you were going to school?
I don't remember. I thought I had a good education in Canada, and I was happy with that. But I do think the standard of professionalism I've experienced here is higher than Canada.
Right.
There's a stronger commitment to education here. There's a longer tradition of education here that professors and teachers feel that they're part of.
I was told somewhere that, you did teach in Japan for a while, right?
Yes, I've taught in Japan.
I was told by someone, I don't know if it's true or not, but that students in Japan work so hard to graduate high school that they basically party through university. Is that true? They just relax and say, we've already mastered almost every subject in the book. We take our tests and then we party. Is that true in Japan?
Well, I don't know if getting through high school in Japan is any less difficult than it is in, say, in Korea or in Taiwan. And so we don't say that about high school students here. When I was in Japan, it wasn't my experience that students graduated from high school and just went crazy.
I don't know, but that's something I heard that we always used to talk about the education. Like a Japanese high school degree was equal back in the 1970s and 80s to an American college degree. That was sort of we were sort of being humiliated by the level of educational performance in the Asian schools. And I think that's still true today in America. We still are being humiliated by Asian, I don't know if it's Confucius values of education. Would you call it that, or you're the sociologist?
There would be some of that. I mean, the governments here are deeply committed to education as part of economic development, and parents and teachers feel a strong commitment to the history here, and you can really feel it.
Right.
And it shows. It shows.
The mere fact they have used bookstores everywhere here.
Yeah.
You don't see used bookstores, even bookstores in America anymore. Yeah. You'll go to a used bookstore in Taiwan, and there are 30 or 40 people in a used bookstore sitting around reading books and talking. These are adults and young people, and it's just amazing. It's not even a librarian they're in there.
Well, but before there were before the internet and Netflix, there were all these comic book stores where children would come and rent comic books.
Yeah.
And very strong tradition.
What happened to those?
Well, they got replaced by the internet.
Right.
Mostly.
These were the manga style Japanese comics that are so popular here. Wow, just amazing.
Well, this idea that kids would use their money to rent books. From a bookstore.
Yeah, and sit there for hours.
You could open a business renting books to kids.
In America, no.
It's amazing.
No. It's a nightmare. I think we have one bookstore left in my city back in Indiana. It's 1,001 books or something like that. And I went back a few years ago, and the traditional DC Marvel comic books they can, just one row, and the Japanese manga are 5 or 6 rows of these in English, of course, and there are people, I mean, unbelievable. They're eating up this manga style storytelling. I don't know what it is about it, but it's fascinating.
It's really well developed. The stories are interesting. The artwork is different. Yeah. And the stories continue for a long time.
And they're not color. They're black and white, which is even stranger. We expect color in our comic books in America. So there's something about Asian style storytelling. Yeah, they have ghosts, a lot of ghosts. What is that? You're a sociologist. What the hell? Ghosts everywhere, every year. Everyone's afraid of ghosts.
The development into modern society here has been happening for a shorter period of time. So pre agricultural society, village society is still, the memory of that is still very much alive.
I see. Okay.
You'll find lots of people still alive who grew up in subsistence farming villages in rural Taiwan or Japan or China. And so that kind of memory is still alive.
Right,
very
the tradition.
much.
Yeah.
So the ghost stories are much better. They're much more alive.
Yeah, I really, I used to tell ghost stories to my children, and when they're little, and they would come back with a better one.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, so you're seeing Asian horror sweeping the world.
Yeah,
now.
Asian horror.
Because it's just better.
Yeah. Yeah, I came across some magazines recently. We have a lot of Malaysians and Indonesians here, and I think it was an Indonesian horror magazine, and it's being sold in an Indonesian grocery store. And I thought, wow, this is the only magazine they have for sale for some reason. They seem to enjoy the supernatural being scary, ghosts, witches. They have a story about a little girl that walks around in the woods with a red hood. It sounds like Little Red Riding Hood from the West. And they have video of her even on YouTube where she's walking behind some hikers here. So that's fascinating stuff. So you started teaching before you got your PhD, I believe, at this university.
Yes.
And so you transitioned from a non-tenure position to tenure.
Well, I had tenure before I got my PhD. I was hired with tenure.
Okay.
Which wasn't unusual at that time, but that was almost 25 years ago.
Wow. Yeah. Those were, I thought that you had, back then you had to have a master's degree, I believe, right?
Well, you still do that. That's the absolute minimum.
That's the minimum,
yeah.
Right? In America, they would never hire you with just a master's.
Well, you probably won't get hired anymore. But
at all,
these days,
any sort of university, Ivy Tech maybe, a community college maybe, something like that.
There are a lot of people with PhDs right now in teaching experience.
Yeah, I've heard that in the U.S., some of these universities are abusing this, paying low salaries for PhDs, and people are literally sleeping in their cars. Apparently, it's shocking. And driving from one campus to another over the years to find work and hope for tenure. I don't know if it's true, but I hear these stories.
Well, that wouldn't be unusual in the U.S. or Canada, where people have to change jobs all the time or juggle several jobs.
Right.
Teaching university or college.
Right. Is it still cheaper in Canada to go to school than it is in the U.S.? Or
it depends. I mean, you can get affordable education in the U.S. There are state schools in the U.S. that aren't brutally expensive if you're a resident.
Right, state resident, right? Yeah. Yes, that's something that me and my wife talk about all the time, whether or not we should get them. They are U.S. citizens, but we have to get them state residency at some point so that if they choose to go to colleges. One of the things I wanted to ask you is that there has been a lot of debate. When you and I were young kids, whatever, we didn't have a library. At least I didn't have a library close by. We certainly didn't have the internet. How did you learn about Shakespeare? How did you learn about any of these interesting subjects?
Well, my father was a school teacher.
Oh, you had this great benefit.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
We had a lot of books at home.
Oh my gosh, that's a plus. Now I didn't have anything, so I ended up kind of waiting till college before I really dived into things that I thought, wow, Shakespeare's amazing. I had no idea, reading the Greek tragedies, wow, But what I'm trying to get to, I think, is that there's some arguments today that, you can learn all about Shakespeare and Greek philosophy on the internet. Do we really need to go to college to I mean, this is a dangerous subject, unless, you're teaching English and you have to be there and you have to communicate and you have to engage people. But if you want to learn about Shakespeare or philosophy or even computer programming, a lot of time when these kids I see at these conferences on hacking, the HitCon, Hackers in Taiwan conference, they're 13 and they're doing coding. They don't have to go to college. they have people there at HitCon that are recruiting from all these Microsoft and all these people of kids that are 16, 17, 18 years old. So what I'm worried about is the university system, the idea of what a university is that going to die off or slow down or?
Well, there's two questions in there.
Oh,
well, yes, definitely. Universities have to change. Am I worried about this? No, not at all. I think this is great.
To challenge universities to change their system, the internet is a challenge to them.
I think this is an opportunity for instruction to grow and change with society and meet a new challenge for the future. And I embrace it. I love this.
Yeah, I do too, actually. Yeah. I wish if I had had the internet when I was that age, I don't know where I would be in the world, but I think I would be a lot, of course, more knowledgeable, but maybe doing a different kind of work than I've been doing.
I see kids today teaching themselves all kinds of technical skills, like you're talking about with computer hackers. I mean, the implication of a hacker is it's a negative sort of thing.
No,
I see all
there's
kinds
white
see,
hackers, black hackers.
If you look on YouTube, you can see all kinds of instructional videos for everything, drawing and making things and mathematics skills. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, my oldest son is only 13, and he's studying Stoic philosophy.
Yeah.
This is ancient Greek Roman Stoicism, which is something I didn't learn about till college. Yeah. And I still didn't really understand how much later in life. And I'm like, my God, he wants to learn ancient Greek, and I bought him a book, and he reads it religiously every day, and I thought, my God, there's something going on here about the YouTube videos he's watching.
Well, so some people talk about this, that the role of a teacher is becoming different. So we've historically thought of teachers as being the expert who comes into the class and tells you the facts that you need to master. But now teachers have to be sort of a planner and orient you toward a body of knowledge that you can go learn yourself.
Yeah, but do you need that person anymore when you can get on the internet and cut through that so quickly? I mean, well, look, you were talking before in the other episode about jiu-jitsu and all these interesting martial arts. Would people be that interested in if they didn't have YouTube and watch this stuff?
No.
Yeah,
but it's funny you should raise jiu-jitsu because that's a kind of activity that you think of as you need partners to learn from. But you don't need teachers anymore because you can go to the internet and learn technique. And there are clubs that run themselves off of internet technique. Right. And my understanding is some of them are quite competitive.
Yeah. So if you reapply that to maybe something else, some other subject area, then you have a real problem. The idea of being a mentor, the archetype mentor of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker, or these replay themselves in different movie sets. I never really felt when I was in university I had a mentor. I had a professor who had 50 kids in the class and didn't really care one way or another if he could remember our names even, let alone. So could universities readapt to a mentorship sort of relationship, or?
Well, they've got no choice if they want to survive.
Right. So, of course, there's abuse in that system as well. People later accuse professors of all kinds of behavior, and then they get fired. There's no evidence. Do you think that video cameras should be in classrooms in professors, that sort of world? Or is that does that sort of self-censor the professor? Self-censorship means I'm not going to tell you the truth about the world that I know exists beyond the walls of this room because I might get into trouble. I might be canceled. We call it canceling in America, being fired, losing my job, losing my show, whatever. That's a psychological thing that you might be able to answer.
Well, I'm a senior professor with tenure right now, and these kinds of threats, any kind of threat, doesn't really intimidate me very much. I don't mind people watching me.
Okay.
I've had lots of people. I've had my neighbor she's doing a master's in TESOL, and she had to do
In what?
Teaching English as a second language.
TESOL. Oh, okay.
And at an American school, and she had to do a class observation. She came and watched me teach. I've had lots of people come and watch me teach.
Great. All right.
But I'm quite confident in my ability and in my teaching. So the idea that somebody would be watching me to make sure
wouldn't change your style or the way you communicate.
No, not at all.
All right.
No,
yeah.
I don't know how I'd feel if I was a junior professor or somebody without as much security as I have.
The fear factor. Yeah. Yeah. I'm interested in these things because they're cropping up as we become more computer advanced. We seem to be tracked on the internet every time we get on Google and type in a word. Let's say we type in, I'm 61. I type in something about health, and all of a sudden I'm getting advertisements on diabetes and health, eye care, and hearing aids, and there's sort of. So I'm becoming conscious of the fact that there's an algorithm. We call it a computer algorithm that knows that I'm a certain age, and I'm becoming worried about my health, or I am interested in my child's welfare in the future and things like that. So, people think that's what we call invasion of privacy issue. So, is that a concern for you as well?
For me personally,
for anybody,
so much.
Do you think that it's not even the government anymore? It's a corporation, Microsoft or whomever has your data.
Once again, when I was younger, I might have been more concerned about that than I am now. It's not something I worry about going into my old age.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
All the bad stories are out there.
Well, we all have what we call demons in our lives. That's a psychological phrase that you might hear from Carl Jung, which you studied. Who do you like more, Carl Jung or Sigmund Freud?
Oh, Carl Jung or Sigmund Freud?
That's a tough one.
I've read a lot of Freud.
Have you?
Yeah, he writes very well.
He does.
So
yes.
I mean, in terms of theory, that's not the direction that I've been working in. But in terms of reading it, Freud reads really well. I would recommend, as literature, I would recommend Freud.
Yeah, we always talk about the Freudian slip, was a slip of the tongue, where I've had the same experience where I've called my girlfriend an old girlfriend's name by accident, and that day is ruined. So, the idea that we have a subconscious or unconscious self that is actually in charge of our lives, we don't like the idea of what we call a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
That's where there's two personalities in you. One is a good guy and the other guy is not so good, and they come out sometimes and fight. So that's what we're talking about, the demons that we try to control in our lives, the dark sides. But I think Carl Jung is fascinating, the dark side stuff, the archetype imagery, the hero narrative, I guess. Do you think that's a reasonable thing to teach young people about their lives, how to see the worldview in terms of being hero, the rise and fall and rise again of the hero idea?
Well, Jung's very popular these days because of his suggestions about archetypes and like major images that have part of our human identity.
Yeah,
like heroes.
Millions of years.
I have a friend who's in Canada who's a published author, and he was. I hadn't seen him for many years, and he and I went out for dinner, and he was telling me that he thought today was it was an age when great stories could make a difference. And I remember at the time I thought, Ridiculous. We're past that age. We're in an age of the internet and mass media and major film productions. But the more I thought of it, and the more I talked to him about it, the more convinced the more I changed my mind. I can say, and I can't say I'm convinced as he is, but I think that's a really interesting suggestion, that there are a lot of people who are lost in a way that they haven't been in the past.
In the modern world,
well,
yes.
We talked about that in our last episode, where about mass psychology, and people don't live in the kind of world that we evolved to live in human history.
Yeah, we're not fighting, we're not killing saber-toothed tigers anymore and protecting our children from tribes nearby, and the myth, the stories.
Well, and so stories, new stories that we can make can give our lives meaning and give us direction in a way that our families and our neighbors used to.
Do they have that same sort of rise and fall and rise hero story in this culture, Asian culture? Do they have that? Do they have the samurai who falls and rises again? I know that they had the samurai story where their master was betrayed and then they came back. That was called Ronin, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of a rise and fall and rise again story, isn't it? Or do they not encourage that kind of story here?
I think about this a little bit differently. Like an understanding of Asian history in Western terms isn't as well developed. So it's harder to talk about the themes of Asian society in the same way we talk about themes in Western society. So there are themes like the hero, and there are these Western themes that occur in Asian society, but the themes that we see here that are going into modern society are only now starting to be developed. So that when we were talking about horror in Asian society,
right,
that's part of it. There are these historically important ideas that are becoming modernized. Ghosts might be one way of thinking about that.
Definitely witches as well.
So there are these older images, but they haven't become fully modernized yet, because maybe in Taiwan, you've only really had one or two generations of Taiwanese living in a fully modernized society.
Yeah, I totally agree. My wife claims that she's not superstitious, but at the same time, when it came time to have a baby, she went to the temple and prayed to the baby god. Yeah. So I go, oh, well, what is this about? And then, of course, she's supposed to be modern. Yet she spent money when my son was a baby, 2 or 3, he couldn't sleep for a few weeks very well. He's crying all night. So my wife takes him down to the temple, and they have what we call an exorcism, where the nuns get the demons out of my baby, my child, my son. And for me, that was an exorcism in America, it would be something very radical, something that you see in the movies that you wouldn't sleep that night over. But here it was like, 3,000 NT, and they would say some prayers, and I thought, I was like treating it like it was going to should I wear a suit and tie? Should I take pictures? Should I send invitation cards to people like it's a birthday party? What is an exorcism in Taiwan? So there is this strange connection with the past that's relatively recent, right?
Yeah. And how that's going to evolve into some form in Taiwanese pop culture, for example, Taiwanese modern identity. It's not really well formed yet.
The Ghost in the Machine is a classic example. Yeah. So that's something that might come out. The West is really into the resurrection, the rebirth, the birth, the death, and the rebirth of the hero narrative, from Jesus, of course, to a football player who no longer can kick the ball, and all of a sudden he wins the big championship. These recurrent themes. Yes. But here is slightly different. They don't fight dragons, though. And the dragons here are very different kinds of monsters, right? Do they fight monsters in this culture and destroy the monster? In the West, it was, you would eat the dragon's heart or the lion's heart, and you would be called Lionheart afterwards. You absorb something of the monster into yourself. Is that a theme here at all?
Well, there are monsters in Asian society.
But do they kill them? Do they destroy them? How do they cope? How do they integrate that monster, which is really themselves, that monster, into their own consciousness to become a full-fledged adult? That's the idea of becoming an adult. You have to kill the dragon, the monster inside yourself, absorb that part of yourself. And maybe this is too deep to talk about, but I think it's fascinating.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is it could be real.
A physical dragon.
What if it's real? Then it's not just a reflection of yourself. If the ghosts are real, when your wife took your son down to the temple
exorcism, right? Were they real demons?
Maybe that was, and we've lost that in the West, and that might be one of the sources of the social problems that plague our society.
We no longer really believe there were demons, but if, let's say, we really did believe, how would, oh my gosh, you think about it, because the nuns at the temple, when my son was going through his exorcism, they said, run to the taxi because the demons are waiting outside. So my wife's running to the taxi. Now, I don't speak Chinese very well, and I have no idea why my wife is running with a baby out the door, and grabbing a taxi. And then we get in a taxi, and I'm out of breath. I'm like, what is going on? She says, they're waiting outside. And who is that? The demons. I go, we don't believe in demons. But then again, what if we did believe in these things?
My students often ask me if I believe in ghosts, and what I tell them is I don't know if ghosts are real or not. I don't think they have any power over me.
It's a reasonable thing. Yeah, of course. But do they believe it? That's the student. That's a Taiwan student, right?
Yeah. Well,
educated, they're in college now. Their math skills are incredible. Their sense of logic, and yet maybe they believe in ghosts.
I talked to a young woman who was just finishing up a master's in engineering, and I talked to her. I was saying, some Taiwanese people believe that there's another world of entities that interacts with us but doesn't live with us, and we can ask them for favors, and they can ask us for favors. And she says, yes, I believe that too.
Would this be science fiction style, what you call fourth dimension or third dimension, or we're in the third dimension? Oh, yeah. I have to check with everybody around me.
Well, we live in a three-dimensional world, yeah.
Yeah, so some people say that there's a fourth dimension where sometimes we interact with this other world and we don't realize it. But I want to live in my dimension. I really don't want to hear about this other dimension.
I don't know if this is so much different than Christians talking about angels or
those
sorts of
and then later it's aliens from another planet or something like that.
Or maybe these are all just different words for the same things that we don't really understand very well.
So these are modern adaptations for old ideas, from angels to aliens. Then psychologists come in and say these are archetypes maybe for something that we want or need in our lives, a mentor, a hero. One of my favorite archetypes, of course, is the femme fatale. That's French for femme, female. Fatale means fatal, dangerous. So dangerous female in every movie is the woman that is beautiful yet dangerous, mysterious. So every man must deal with that in these hero stories. So there are all kinds of archetypes, right? So the ghost archetype is another one, right? Okay, sorry, Derbyshire. I'd like to talk about ghosts and all this for hours, but unfortunately we can't, Scott. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, it's been great to talk to you again.
Yeah, I hope that you can come back to Fantastic Formosa. And wow, a lot of fun today. Thank you.
Well, it's been great talking to you. I'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.